Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today to our Real Talk podcast. Have there ever been instances where I know like in counseling, you meet with somebody and you've given them everything you've got and they just don't want to listen, they don't want to take your advice, they don't want to do anything? Is it kind of similar in life coaching where you kind of reach that point with a person and you're like, I have to just kind of break this off until you're ready? What does that look like?
Yeah, it looks very similar to that.
Yeah.
So if we're doing the same things Groundhog Day over and over and over and over, then my question to you becomes, tell me what you really need. Because we've got ways of making this, what you've talked about, better, but that's not where you need to be. So let's talk about where you really are, because usually in that position, it's a bait and switch, right? I'll give you an example. So in my training, we did one-on-one sessions with each other during training. And so I don't remember what the exact thing was, but you had to come up with a problem. And I was just like the kid in the candy store. I was having such a great time that I wasn't thinking in terms of problems. So I was like, well, crud, I've got to figure out something to say. So my thing was, I really would love to sit and be able to just recreationally read. I could see myself in the pretty chair with the throw and the reading, and how lovely. So the person says to me, okay, well, talk about time commitments. This thing turned into a debacle because it was never about me actually trying to find time, because I got news for you. Either of you asked me for something, I would find the time for it. I always say too busy is a crud excuse, right? Because there is no too busy. If it's something that I want to get done, you can trust me that I will do it. So it gave me a great insight into when humans are doing that with me. That's usually not the problem. There's something else. And so what am I filling for you? So you coming in and seeing me, I love seeing you. This is great. But how are we making you better? How do you feel better about yourself? And if you don't feel better when you leave, then I'm not doing my job, and that's not good for me. So it's really not a matter of stepping back. It's a matter of refocusing on what actually the problem is, because if we're not hitting it with all the different ways to do that, then it's a different problem.
It's interesting.
Well, and I want to follow up. You also said part of your certification, you said you went, once you got your certification done, then you became a biblical life coach. So you got your certification there. So let's talk about the non-believer, the person who has no belief system, or they do and it's minimal, however you want to title that.
Sure.
Can a non-believer still come get support from a biblically certified life coach?
1,000%. So what we bring into your conversation is what you bring into me. And so we start there, whatever, like I said, whatever the pebble is, right? Let's start with the pebble and let's kind of look at that. What has been interesting to me with that thought, with that question in mind, is my job is not to evangelize, but I'm who I am, and I have my own worldview, right? And so I'm not going. That's not malleable for me. That is who I am. And so I had a young, recently divorced woman who was dating, and she wanted to make sure she didn't make the same mistakes that she had made. And I'm not calling them mistakes. I'm using her vernacular, right? Please hear that. And so she talked about this new relationship, and we did the pebble thing, and then went into the next session, and she talked about that he wanted her to go to church with him. And so my question, instead of jumping on the table and saying hallelujah, my question was, how do you feel about that? Well, church had not been a lot of her world. And so what are your fears with that? And so we kind of worked through that part. So the next session, we'd gone to church, and they loved it, and they'd done it as a full family because he had children, she had children. And so we talked through that. And as the time progressed, the next thing that came up, by God related, I guess, was she said, we're looking at something to do full family. So we're trying to figure out if there's a game or there's a TV show or there's something that we could do to start forming a family unit. And I said, oh, well, there's an Open Door Christian bookstore is right around the corner from my building. And so if you maybe went and bought some children's Bible stories, how cool would it be to kind of sit down at night and do a Bible story and let the kids ask questions? And you knew that that had never occurred to her. But because she'd fed me those pebbles, I felt very good about bringing that in. Would I have done that the first session? Absolutely not. I would not have. I would have made a different suggestion. But it's interesting how if you just open up, and I'm, like I said, it's not evangelical, but I am who I am. And so the session is never about me, but my beliefs kind of enter in and out depending on what we're talking about. And so someone that is not a non-believer, we're going to still have the same conversation. I am not going to try to convince them to do anything, but oftentimes if you just open that door, there's some interest. And then you open a door slight for me and I'm right there, right? And so that allows us to have those conversations. Now, the other way about that is someone starts and they start talking about their belief system, then then I can take a different path. But everything is predicated on what I'm given.
One of the tagged questions in here was to have you explain pant size logic. So what is that?
So I hope this is not offensive at all. I think our own personal brains mess with us. I think that we get ideas about ourselves that are not necessarily true. I think then we paint a picture. My father, many, many years ago, wrote screenplays. And so I call it writing screenplays. And I think we all do it. We write our screenplay. And if I'm going to interact with people I don't know, then I've got a little screenplay going on in my head. And then she's going to say, and then I'm going to say, and then she's going to say, and then I'm going to say. Unfortunately, y'all never read my screenplays before I talk with you. And so you never say the words that are in my head. So once we can start letting go of that, those images, those thoughts, it makes life a little bit easier to deal with. So I grew up as a larger child. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm not making fun of that. I'm just telling you that that's the case. It's in no way is it making fun. It's just I'm giving you a fact. And so because of who I was as a child, that kid's still in there. Like, even though it was 100 years ago, that kid's still jumping around having a good time. And so I have a distorted vision of my body based on that 10-year-old. And one day, for whatever reason, I was I was getting rid of things to donate. And as I'm going through the pants, I'm looking at the pants and I look at the size and I think to myself, oh, hold on. I look in the mirror and I see something that I don't like some days. Factual information. But I'm looking at the size in the pant and I'm thinking, okay, that number does not match what's in my head. So then I have to go to logic and I have to say to myself, okay, Tammy, I know how you feel and I know what you see and I know how that feels. But logically, that number does not match what you got going on in your head. And so if you've got to believe the craziness that goes on in your own head, or you've got to believe what that number says in that pant that was sewed on by somebody that had no idea who you were, let's go with the logic. And so what I use that for is not about size, but about that is what coaching is predicated on, is I don't know how you feel. I know what you're telling me about how you feel, and I am supporting you in that. I'm not making fun of it. I'm not telling you you're wrong. I never tell someone they're wrong. But what I can do is say to you, what does the logic say? And if we can get to that, it's much better than my thought, because I can say to you, oh, you're perfect and you're wonderful and you're all of those things. And for a moment, you're going to sit up a little taller and you're going to say, well, cool, I'm beautiful today. But then at some point, your own brain is going to take back over. And when it does, wouldn't it be great to fall back on logic that had nothing to do with what Tammy's opinion was, but had to do with real logic? And that's what my coaching is predicated on. I could blow you smoke all day long. And I kind of like humans. I think humans are my superpower. And I think that making them feel better is a good thing. But if I'm making you feel better just momentarily, it's smoke, right? It's going to evaporate. But if I can give you something to actually hold on to, a logical thing, like I said, I didn't know who sewed in the number in my pants. Had nothing to do with them. I just bought those pants and I put them on. And I've got to remember that some days they fit better than others. but those are my pants.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I kind of look at coaching. How can I help you to see what the logic in your life can be?
That's a great point, because we call them narratives. I always tell people, you've spun a narrative
Mm-hmm.
and you've got all kinds of play characters in this narrative, and I didn't get a script, but yet I've played out a whole chapter in this narrative,
Yeah.
and you're mad at me for something that I didn't even do. I didn't even know I was supposed to do, because I don't own the rights to your play.
100%.
And really bringing that person down to a ground level and getting them to see what is for what is, and not maybe what we invented in our mind. And I think, I have a hate-love relationship with social media, because I always say to myself, not everything that you see in social media is correct. They're living out their narrative. And so they will have their characters do all kinds of stuff in there, and people just take it for what it is. And we put so much pressure on ourselves to meet that false narrative, because for whatever reason, I now idolize this person, or I think, oh my gosh, they have it all together. And it's all an act. That
Absolutely.
Once they turn that filter off and they turn their recording off, the life goes right back to being chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm holding myself to an unrealistic narrative that's not even there. So I love the down to earth aspect of just get to see things for what they are. I have a little bit of PTSD that I came out of the military with, and I haven't had a lot of panic attacks, but I've had a few in my life. And I remember the first time I had a panic attack, I didn't know what was happening, and that actually happened in high school. So pre-military, that was just stuff that was going on in school.
Sure.
But I remember hiding in the bathroom stall trying to figure out what just happened. I didn't know what had happened.
Sure.
And then moving forward post 9/11, because we were deployed for 9/11, they started coming a little bit with a lot more. They were just more frequent. And I had to come up with like a list of things to anchor me back, because I knew stuff was spinning, and I was like, I've never even seen this person ever a day in my life.
Sure.
So how could they possibly be a threat to me in this situation right now, in this moment?
1,000%.
Airports were a thing that got me. If I saw like backpacks, that would just spin me out of control. So I would have to like stop for a second, and I created like about a 5 to 7 question, real quick assessment. Boom, 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 boom. Jovi, it's okay. No, they don't want to hurt you. No, can you run? Can you exit? Da, 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 da. But it was a grounding moment for me to be able to get to that point and say, I'm going to be okay. Just take a breath, and then kind of let that wave pass, reassess, and move forward.
Sure.
But I had to implement that, because it was getting to the point where if I didn't implement that, those panic attacks were going to own me, instead of me getting to the point where I was like, and now 20 years post, I can, if I kind of sense that I might be going in that direction, the moment that I think, there's a little spinning going on, I can pull it down real quick. But it's anchoring for me to know logically, just look at this logically, is this even something that's a reality right now? So I totally get that concept. So,
and I think that, like I said, in the mental health field, no matter what area that you're working with, whether it is a life coach, a counselor, a therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, whatever you're doing, you've got to make sure that that person works with you, right? Whatever the degree is and whatever the certification is, you've got to find your person. Like that's the first thing. Then depending on what you need, but logic doesn't lie. That's my favorite part is as I said, I could tell you you're the greatest person in the whole wide world, but in situations like that, you need something exact. You need to be able to base yourself on things that can't change. And so that's what you've done in that grounding moment. And that's where I feel like this can help people, because it's not just flowery language, right? Flowery language is great, but I don't know that that's going to help me in a moment that I'm
Right.
falling apart. It's not going to help me in a moment where I'm upset with the same person that I've been upset with 40,000 times, and I'm fearing the situation because I know I'm going to have to interact with them. Well, okay, so what are we going to do so that you don't go into that place the next time you're going to interact? Like that's where life coaching comes into effect. It's not for me, and it can be, and it's as different as the people that do it, right? For me, while it is completely supportive, it is not soft and cuddly. It's not, oh, you poor thing. I never say that. What I say is, what's the problem? How can we fix it? How can we fix it together? And that, I think, is where there's some light at the end of the tunnel.
And I do have one follow-up question.
Yeah,
go.
With one of our former guests, one of the statements that she talked about was a soft handoff.
Mm-hmm.
So, you're visiting with someone and you realize, okay, this exceeds what I'm able to do. In your situation, let's say it does start off really well. And in the example that you gave earlier, this individual goes several visits in, and now you really figure out this is the rock. It's a boulder in the shoe. It's no longer a pebble. This thing is
100%.
huge. And now you recognize, I don't think I can help you past this.
Mhm.
Do you have a set list of resources? Our city's not very big, so we don't have a great list of people that can help. But what does that soft handoff look like for you? If you get to the point with someone that you realize, I think we've hit capacity here. I think there's nothing else that I can do for you, so I want to recommend someone else. What does that referral look like for you in your practice?
So what that looks like for me is I start doing a little bit of research in the area. So you talked about PTSD. So I wouldn't want to recommend you to someone that had no bearing with PTSD, right? So that takes a little bit of research on my part. And I try to get them 2 or 3 names in the area that, so they specialize in. I know someone recently that looked into, not one of my clients, but someone I know looked into narcissistic personality disorder, but from a Christian perspective. Well, that's a niche, right? Like so it becomes a little bit of research on my part to be able to look at different ways of finding it. And then what I always suggest is I give them 2 or 3 names and let them find their person. You talked about the specialty field in medicine, where if I need a specialist, my doctor says this is who you go see. In this vein, it's got to be somebody not only that is qualified, but is someone that fits. And so that's how I do that.
And I think really for listeners to remember, don't get discouraged. I have a friend of mine who went through several counselors before she found the counselor. I remember her calling me and telling me, I don't think I'm going to click with this person because I feel like there may be a little bit of flowery language and I just need them to shoot it to me straight.
Yeah.
Well, then the other one was too much of a straight shooter. And so it was like, well, this one's a little bit too far on this end.
Sure.
So it took a little bit. And then I have one friend who for her to even go to counseling was huge. I was like, thank you, God, right? And then the insurance canceled it. And so she was able to get as much counseling as she would, and she was devastated because it's like a breakup that you're having and you can't even imagine. You mean I have to start over? And sometimes that happens. But my prayer for her was that she'd been able to obtain enough tools during the sessions that she'd had that if it would take her 3 to 6 months before she found another counselor, that she was able to kind of function with the tools that she had to move forward.
Sure.
So those are realities, is
Absolutely.
that you can start with someone and insurance doesn't cover it, or it takes you 3 or 4 visits. So don't be discouraged as a listener. If you're desiring to look for a counselor, it's like, I always call it like speed dating. I might have to ask 3 or 4 questions and I might have to go through 3 or 4 before I find the one that I connect with. But man, when you do, it's awesome.
Absolutely.
It's awesome. So
yeah. And that's what I love part about, when you were talking about that 15-minute, like kind of onboarding call to see if you are a good fit, because it's okay if you're not a good fit.
Oh,
for somebody.
1,000%.
I mean, I think
for both of us,
people
it's a good
coming
thing.
in, they're like, oh, this is my counselor. It's got to be, and it's okay if it's not.
Absolutely.
And I think people realizing that, and, you saying, hey, if we're not a good fit, that's okay. Here are some other things that you could try. Here's some other people.
Absolutely.
I think that's huge.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing with us. I've teetered on the life coaching. I've always wondered, man, would I make a good life coach? Would I like to do that? And not really knowing, I never really researched it. You read about it, especially in the research that I've done, but it's been awesome to get to hear your passion, because there's a passion in your voice and there's a passion in why you do what you're doing. And I think that makes a difference. This isn't just a paycheck. This isn't just, I have to go to the office. I feel like I'm called to do this. I feel like I'm anointed to do this. I feel like God has given me the gifts and talents. As a fellow believer, I believe that when the Bible says, right, when I created you, I perfectly knit you together. So I do believe that God instills in us the very things that we need to be the people he created us to be. So thank you for being obedient to the 4 humans that came into your life and said, hey, maybe you should consider that. It's amazing to me when God highlights those giftings and other people see it and speak it out, what was in plain sight your whole life.
Right. And the other interesting part for me in it from this side is, I will tell you that sometimes questions come in my head that were nowhere my questions. Or I will be able to put things together that in the natural, I don't think I would have been able to do. And so that's how I know it's a God thing. Like I don't claim any of this. It is a blessing. It is a privilege. It is a gift. And I really like rolling up my sleeves and working with the best boss ever to be able to work with people.
How awesome. We forget that, right? That when we choose our worldview to be biblical, we do believe that we're all children, sons and daughters of the Most High King. And so when he gives you a specific talent to help his children, it is an honor and a privilege to be a good steward with the talent I've been given. I'm not going to hide this. I'm not going to waste it. I'm going to use it to the best of my ability. So one more time, I want to give your information. It's Tamara Schaefer Shike, life coach, CPC. And you're right here in Terre Haute, Indiana.
I am. But I do Zoom sessions. If they are outside, I have Indianapolis surrounding area clients, Marshall, Paris, that would rather do a Zoom. We can do that as well. So I'm very adaptable.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning into Real Talk today. If you have any questions or want to reach out to Tamara, please see her information below, and we'll see you next time on Real Talk.
Thank you.